Danny, what the hell is going on?
It was a misunderstanding. This nurse was refusing to treat my brother.
He pulled his gun on me. He threatened me.
The digital clock on the wall of the City Central Hospital's emergency department glowed with the sterile, unforgiving red of 2:17 p.m. For Nurse Angela Brown, the afternoon shift was a symphony of controlled chaos, a frantic ballet she had choreographed for over a decade. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, the faint metallic tang of blood, and the low hum of human anxiety. Every beep of a monitor, every rushed footstep on the linoleum, every hushed, urgent conversation was a note in a composition she knew by heart. She moved through it all with a practiced calm that bordered on serene, a steady island in a sea of emergencies. At 38, Angela had a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. Her scrubs were immaculate, her hair was pulled back in a tight professional bun, and her eyes, though tired from the long hours, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a woman who could calculate a drug dosage in a split second, comfort a grieving parent, and stare down a belligerent patient without ever raising her voice. This wasn't just a job for her, it was a calling. She was the nurse who mentored the new residents, the one who remembered the names of the frequent flyers, the one who could find a viable vein on a patient that 3 others had given up on. Today was no different. In Trauma Bay 2, a construction worker was being prepped for surgery, his leg mangled from a fall. Angela was a whirlwind of efficiency, her hands moving with precision as she administered morphine, checked his vitals, and offered a few reassuring words that cut through his pain-induced haze. "We've got you, sir. The best orthopedic surgeon in the city is on his way down," she said, her voice a soothing balm. Moment later, she was at the main desk, coordinating with a paramedic team bringing in a possible stroke victim, her mind already running through the checklist of protocols. Being a black woman in a high-stakes medical field came with its own unique set of challenges. She had learned early on to navigate the subtle currents of bias with an unshakable professionalism. She had been mistaken for a janitor, an aide, a dietary assistant, never the lead trauma nurse in charge of a dozen lives. She had felt the sting of a patient refusing her care, asking for a different nurse. She had heard her expertise questioned in ways her white colleagues never experienced. But Angela never let it crack her composure. Her defense was her competence. Her excellence was her shield. She knew her worth, and she proved it with every life she helped save, with every crisis she calmly diffused. Her work spoke for itself, a language universally understood in the life-or-death theater of the ER. "Angela, can you take a look at the kid in curtain 4? Fever of 103, mom's losing it," a younger nurse, Maria, asked, her face etched with worry. Angela gave a reassuring nod. "On my way. Did you get the Tylenol order in?" Maria nodded. "Dr. Harris just put it in." "Good. Deep breaths, Maria. You're doing fine. Remember, we treat the patient, not the parent's anxiety." She walked toward curtain 4, her mind already shifting gears. This was the rhythm of her life, a constant, demanding dance of skill, empathy, and immense pressure. She was saving lives, one patient at a time, completely unaware that the greatest threat she would face today wouldn't come from a medical emergency, but from a man sworn to protect and serve. A man whose rage was about to shatter the controlled peace of her world. A man who thought his badge made him a god, and who had no idea that the quiet, dedicated nurse in his path was about to become the immovable object to his unstoppable force, in a confrontation that would cost him his career, his freedom, and his entire future. The automatic doors of the ER hissed open with a violent burst, admitting not a gurney, but a storm of pure, unadulterated panic. Officer Daniel Wright, 36 years old and 10 years on the force, filled the doorway. He wasn't in uniform, but he carried the authority of his profession like a second skin, in the rigid set of his shoulders, the clipped, commanding way he moved, and the palpable aura of impatience that radiated from him. His face, usually set in a hardened scowl, was pale and slick with sweat. In his arms, he was half carrying, half dragging a younger man who was groaning in agony, his left arm wrapped in a blood-soaked t-shirt. This was Kevin, Daniel's younger brother. "I need a doctor! Now!" Daniel's voice wasn't a request, it was a command, a drill sergeant's bark that cut through the low din of the waiting room. Heads snapped up. The triage nurse, an older woman named Brenda, looked up from her computer, her expression practiced and calm. "Sir, you need to come to the desk." "The hell I do," Daniel snapped, bypassing the desk and striding directly toward the double doors leading to the treatment area. "My brother's bleeding out. He fell off a ladder. I think his arm is broken. Maybe an artery is cut." His voice was a raw mix of fear and fury. He saw the world through a simple lens. There were rules for civilians, and there were professional courtesies for cops. He was a cop. He expected doors to open for him. Brenda stood up, a small but firm obstacle in his path. "Sir, I understand, but I need to get his information and assess him. It's the only way we can—" Daniel didn't let her finish. He flashed the badge clipped to his belt. "He's the brother of a police officer. We're not waiting." It was a line he'd used before, a magic key he believed unlocked a world of special treatment. To him, the Blue family wasn't just a concept, it was a hierarchy, and he was at the top. He saw his brother's blood, and in his mind, that trumped every rule in the hospital. The waiting room was filled with its own quiet tragedies, a child with a hacking cough, an elderly man clutching his chest, a woman silently weeping into her phone. To Daniel, they were invisible, mere background noise to his singular, all-consuming crisis. This was the infamous temper his colleagues at the precinct knew so well. It was a fuse that burned short and hot. On the streets, it had been called proactive and assertive. It got results, so it was tolerated, even quietly encouraged. His partners learned to work around it, to de-escalate his temper before it could blow up in an official report. They covered for him, explaining away his outbursts as the product of a high-stress job. Daniel had come to believe his rage was a tool, a part of his authority. He had never faced a real consequence for it, and that absence of accountability had allowed it to fester, to grow into a monster that he now unleashed in the one place where panic was the enemy of order. Angela Brown, hearing the commotion from down the hall, emerged from behind curtain 4. She saw the scene unfolding. The panicked officer, the bleeding brother, the flustered but resolute triage nurse. Her training kicked in instantly. She assessed the situation not with emotion, but with clinical precision. The patient was conscious and breathing. The bleeding on his arm, while significant, didn't appear to be the arterial spray of an immediate life-or-death situation. It was serious, but it needed to be triaged, just like everyone else. She began walking toward the confrontation, her expression calm, her purpose clear. She was the charge nurse. This was her floor, her responsibility. She was about to step between a man used to unquestioning compliance and a system built on impartial procedure. The collision was inevitable, and the fallout would be catastrophic. Daniel Wright, in his agony and arrogance, saw only a hospital employee in his way. He had no idea he was looking at the woman who would become the architect of his ruin. As Angela approached, her very presence seemed to lower the temperature by a few degrees. Her walk was unhurried, her face a mask of professional empathy. "I'm Angela Brown, the charge nurse," she said, her voice steady and clear, addressing Daniel but including the distressed Brenda in her gaze. "Let's see what's going on with your brother. Brenda, can you grab a wheelchair and a pressure dressing, please?" She was taking control, her words a calm counterpoint to Daniel's frantic energy. For a moment it seemed to work. Daniel allowed Brenda to help his brother Kevin into a wheelchair. But the moment of compliance was fleeting. "All right, he's in the chair. Now where's the doctor?" Daniel demanded, turning his full, intimidating attention on Angela. His eyes scanned her name tag, and a flicker of something, annoyance, dismissal, crossed his face. "Sir, we have a system here called triage," Angela began to explain, her tone patient, as if speaking to a worried family member, not a belligerent officer. "It means we assess every patient to determine the severity of their condition. Those with the most life-threatening injuries are seen first. A nurse will assess your brother in just a moment, and then a doctor will see him based on that assessment. She was explaining the fundamental logic of an emergency room, a logic that had saved countless lives. To Daniel, it sounded like bureaucratic nonsense. It sounded like a dismissal. "Triage? Are you kidding me? Look at him!" he roared, pointing at his brother, whose face was now ashen with pain. "He's bleeding! My brother is a good man. He pays his taxes. He shouldn't have to wait behind some drug addict who overdosed." The waiting room fell into a stunned silence. Every eye was on them. Angela's expression didn't change, but her spine stiffened. She had heard variations of this speech 100 times. It was the rhetoric of entitlement, the belief that one person's pain was more important than another's. "Sir, everyone in this waiting room is in pain," she said, her voice dropping slightly, losing its gentle, explanatory tone and gaining a quiet firmness. "And everyone will be seen. Your brother is my priority right now, but I have other critical patients. You need to let us do our jobs." Her professionalism was a brick wall, and Daniel Wright had just run into it at full speed. His entire life, his uniform and badge had been a battering ram that broke down walls like this. He couldn't comprehend why it wasn't working. In his mind, inflamed by fear for his brother, he wasn't being unreasonable. She was. He saw her calm demeanor not as professional, but as dismissive. He saw her adherence to protocol not as responsible, but as a personal slight. He was Officer Daniel Wright. People did what he said. "Your priority? Lady, you have no idea who I am," he sneered, stepping closer, invading her personal space. He was trying to intimidate her, to use his physical presence to achieve what his badge hadn't. Angela didn't flinch. She didn't take a step back. "I know you're a scared brother," she said, her gaze unwavering, "and I'm the nurse who is going to make sure he gets the best possible care. But you have to let me do that. By standing here and yelling, you are delaying his treatment and disrupting the care of every other patient in this ER." She had drawn a line in the sand, not out of ego, but out of duty to her patient and her profession. But Daniel didn't see a line. He saw a challenge to his authority from a black woman he felt had no right to tell him what to do. His short fuse had been lit, and it was now burning down to the powder. The simmering rage was about to become an explosion, and the whole world was about to see the real Daniel Wright. What happens when a man with a gun and a badge feels powerless? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is where the story turns, and you don't want to miss it. The air in the waiting room grew thick and heavy, charged with the energy of an impending thunderstorm. Daniel Wright's face contorted, the muscles in his jaw clenching as Angela's words echoed in his ears. "You have to let me do that." It was a simple, professional statement, but in the warped reality of his rage, it was the ultimate act of defiance. He saw her calm, dark face and saw a challenge. He saw her uniform scrubs and saw an obstacle. All the frustration, all the fear for his brother, all the latent entitlement of his badge, and all the ugly, hidden racism that festered beneath the surface coalesced into a single, horrifying moment of pure fury. "You don't tell me what to do," he snarled, his voice a low, menacing growl. Then he uttered the words that would seal his fate. "You people are all the same. A little bit of power and you think you can disrespect a police officer." The racial undertone was no longer subtle. It was a blaring siren of hate that shocked the room into absolute stillness. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Brenda, the triage nurse, froze with her hand on the phone to call security. Kevin, his face pale from blood loss, looked at his brother with dawning horror. "Dan, just stop," he whispered, but his voice was lost in the hurricane of his brother's anger. Angela's face, for the first time, lost its professional neutrality. A flicker of pain, of disbelief crossed her features before being replaced by a steely resolve. She opened her mouth to speak, to call security, to do something, but she never got the chance. In a movement that was shockingly fast, Daniel's hand went to the small of his back, to the off-duty Glock he was legally carrying. He didn't draw it and aim. He did something worse, something more insidious. He unholstered the weapon, keeping it pointed at the floor, but he held it in his hand, his finger resting just outside the trigger guard. It wasn't an overt threat of immediate violence. It was a symbol. It was a terrifying reminder of the power he held, a piece of black steel that said, "I am the law, and you are nothing." "Now," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "you're going to get my brother a doctor. Right. Now." Time seemed to stop. The beeping of the monitors, the quiet sobs of a woman in the corner, the hum of the ventilation, it all faded away. The only thing that existed was the officer, the nurse, and the gun hanging between them. Angela stood her ground, but a tremor ran through her. This was no longer about hospital policy. This was a man with a gun and a God complex, fueled by racial animus, threatening a healthcare worker in a room full of sick and injured people. But they were not the only ones watching. Down the hall, Dr. Michael Harris had been drawn out by the shouting. He was a young, sharp resident who had seen his share of chaos, but nothing like this. He saw the gun. His first instinct was to rush forward, but his medical training screamed at him not to escalate. An angry man with a gun was a dangerous variable. Instead, he did the smartest thing he could possibly do. He stayed partially concealed behind the corner of the nurse's station, pulled out his personal cell phone, and with his thumb shaking slightly, he hit the video record button. The lens of his phone's camera was a silent, impartial witness. It couldn't feel the fear in the room. It couldn't hear the frantic beating of Angela's heart. It just recorded. It captured the glint of the overhead lights on the barrel of the Glock. It captured Daniel's sneering, hate-filled face. It captured Angela's quiet, terrified bravery. It was capturing the evidence that would unravel a decade-long career and expose the rot hiding behind a badge. He had no idea he was filming the end of Officer Daniel Wright's life as he knew it. The moment stretched into an eternity, the standoff held in a fragile, terrifying suspension. The sight of the gun had transformed the ER waiting room into a potential crime scene. Finally, the spell was broken by the sound of approaching sirens, growing rapidly louder. Someone, likely Brenda, had managed to hit a panic button or make a silent call. The sound seemed to pierce through Daniel's red haze of fury. His eyes darted toward the entrance, and a flicker of self-preservation, of dawning horror at what he'd just done, crossed his face. He quickly and clumsily reholstered his weapon, the metallic click echoing in the silent room. Just as he did, two uniformed officers burst through the doors, their hands on their own sidearms, their eyes scanning for a threat. One of them was a woman in her late 20s, Officer Lisa Carter. Her eyes widened in shock and recognition as she saw Daniel. "Right! What the hell is going on?" she exclaimed. Daniel, his face now drained of color, immediately shifted into damage control mode. "It's my brother, Lisa," he said, his voice raspy. "He's hurt bad, and this nurse," he gestured dismissively at Angela, "was refusing to get him a doctor." He was already spinning the narrative, painting himself as a frantic brother and Angela as an uncooperative bureaucrat. It was a lie, a grotesque distortion of the truth, but it was the first brick he laid in what he hoped would be a wall of denial. Lisa Carter looked from Daniel's panicked face to Angela's stony, composed one. She saw the terrified expressions of the people in the waiting room. She knew Daniel. She knew his temper. She had been his partner for 6 months, a rookie paired with a veteran. She had seen him yell, seen him intimidate suspects, seen him bend the rules until they were about to break. She had always told herself it was just how he got the job done. She had stayed quiet, chalking it up to his passion, his dedication. But this was different. The fear in this room was palpable. She looked at Angela, a woman who was clearly a professional, now standing ramrod straight, her face a mixture of shock and profound insult. Lisa's mind was racing. Her duty was to de-escalate, to control the scene. But her loyalty, ingrained in her from the academy, was to her brother in blue. The blue wall of silence wasn't a formal policy. It was a culture, an unspoken pact. You protect your own, no matter what. You handle things internally. You present a united front to the outside world. Her sergeant's voice echoed in her head. Never, ever make another cop look bad on the street. Her immediate choice would define her career and possibly the rest of her life. She could side with Daniel, help smooth things over, and write a report that minimized the incident. Or she could do what her conscience was screaming at her to do. Find out the truth, even if it meant incinerating the career of the man standing next to her. "Let's just calm down, Dan," she said, her voice trying to project an authority she didn't feel. She turned to Angela. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Carter. Can you tell me what happened?" Before Angela could answer, Daniel cut in again. "Nothing happened. It was a misunderstanding. Now, is someone going to help my brother or not?" He was trying to bulldoze past the event, to erase the last 5 minutes. But the memory of the gun was seared into the minds of everyone who had seen it. And more importantly, it was saved on a device just a few feet away, a digital ghost waiting to tell the real story. Lisa Carter stood at a crossroads, caught between a toxic loyalty and the oath she took to uphold the law for everyone. The choice she was about to make would have repercussions she couldn't possibly imagine. While Officer Carter was trying to navigate the impossible situation at the front of the ER, Dr. Michael Harris was making a calculated retreat. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but his mind was crystal clear. He had stopped recording the moment Daniel holstered his weapon and the other officers arrived. Now, the small phone in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It contained the objective, irrefutable truth. He slipped back down the hallway, away from the scene, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do. The evidence on his phone was volatile. In the wrong hands, it could be deleted. If he handed it over to the officers on the scene, one of whom was the perpetrator's partner, it could vanish into an evidence locker and never be seen again. He ducked into an empty exam room, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocked his phone. He watched the video once, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. It was even worse than he remembered. The raw, racial animosity in Daniel's voice, the casual, terrifying way he brandished his firearm, Angela's stoic, brave posture. It was all there, a perfect, damning record. He immediately sent the file to his personal encrypted cloud storage account. Then, as a second layer of protection, he emailed it to his private email address with the subject line, ER Incident, 2:22 p.m. He was creating a digital trail, making the evidence redundant and almost impossible to erase completely. He knew he was taking a risk. This video would pit him against the local police department, an institution not known for taking kindly to being exposed. But then he thought of Angela. He had worked with her for 2 years. He had seen her save lives, comfort the dying, and handle every kind of stress imaginable with grace and competence. The thought of her being subjected to that kind of racist threat in her own hospital by a man with a gun and a badge filled him with a cold, protective fury. He owed it to her. The hospital owed it to her. The city owed it to her. This couldn't be swept under the rug. He took a deep breath, deleted the original file from his phone's local storage, leaving the copies in the cloud and his email, and walked back out into the hallway. By now, a hospital administrator and the head of security had arrived. Daniel, seeing his brother was finally being wheeled back into the treatment area, was starting to regain his composure, his story solidifying. "It was a heated moment," he was telling his partner, Lisa. "I was worried. She was being difficult, that's all." Lisa was listening, her face unreadable. Dr. Harris approached the hospital administrator, a man named Mr. Thompson. "There's something you need to see," he said, his voice low but firm, "in private." He led Thompson and the security chief into an office, closed the door, and played the video he had saved in his email. The color drained from Mr. Thompson's face. The security chief, a retired police captain, swore under his breath. They watched the entire 47-second clip in stunned silence. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. It was a clear-cut case of aggravated menacing, abuse of authority, and very likely a hate crime. "My God," Thompson whispered, "the liability." The security chief shook his head. "It's worse than that. This is a criminal act." He looked at Dr. Harris. "You did the right thing, son. The absolute right thing. Don't show this to anyone else. We need to handle this at the highest level." The digital ghost was out. It could no longer be contained. The file that Dr. Harris had created was about to begin a journey, from a private email to the hospital's legal department, to the district attorney's office, and eventually onto the screens of millions of people across the country. Officer Daniel Wright thought he had put the fire out. He had no idea he was standing in a room soaked in gasoline, and Dr. Harris had just provided the match. Back at the 17th precinct, the gears of institutional self-preservation were already grinding into motion. Officer Lisa Carter sat in front of her computer, the blank incident report screen staring back at her like a silent accusation. Her sergeant, a burly old-school cop named Frank Rizzo, stood behind her, his arms crossed. Daniel was in the break room nursing a cup of coffee, having already given his version of the events. It was a masterpiece of omission and misdirection. According to Daniel, there had been a verbal disagreement with an uncooperative nurse. He admitted to being loud and emotional due to his brother's injury, but insisted he had only unholstered his weapon because he felt the escalating tension in the waiting room could become a potential security threat. He claimed he was preparing to secure the area, not threaten the nurse. It was a desperate, almost laughable lie, but it was the story he was sticking to. "So, Carter," Rizzo said, his voice a low rumble, "you were there. You talked to the nurse. It was just a big misunderstanding, right? Tempers flared. No harm, no foul." It wasn't a question, it was a directive. He was telling her how the report was going to be written. He was telling her to fall in line. Lisa's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about what she had seen. She hadn't witnessed the gun being drawn, but she had arrived in the immediate toxic aftermath. She had seen the terror in the eyes of the civilians. She had seen the righteous, silent fury on Angela Brown's face. Her gut told her Daniel's story was a complete fabrication. "Sarge, I think it was more serious than that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The nurse, she looked terrified. The people in the waiting room." Rizzo cut her off with a wave of his hand. "The public overreacts. They don't understand the pressure we're under. Danny's brother was hurt. He was being a brother, a protector. That nurse probably had an attitude problem. You know how some of them can be." The unspoken implication hung in the air, thick and ugly. Some of them. This was the blue wall in action. It was a fortress built of euphemisms and rationalizations. Verbal disagreement instead of threats. Uncooperative instead of professional. He was stressed instead of he lost control. Lisa felt a wave of nausea. This was the moment of her first real test. Every cop faced it eventually. A moment where you had to choose between the comfortable lie that protected a fellow officer and the hard truth that upheld the oath you swore. She looked around the squad room. She saw the other officers pointedly not looking at her, but listening to every word. She saw the pictures of fallen officers on the wall. The sense of brotherhood, of family, was suffocating her. To betray that was to become an outcast, a rat. Your backup would be a few seconds slower to arrive. Your calls for help might not be heard as clearly. It was a cold and lonely road. "Just write it up, Carter," Rizzo said, his voice hardening. Wright was acting as a concerned family member. The situation was de-escalated. End of story. He clapped her on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt like a lead weight. "He's a good cop. He's got your back out there. Don't you forget that." He walked away, leaving her alone with the blinking cursor. She began to type, her hands feeling disconnected from her mind. At approximately 14:25 hours, I responded to a call for a disturbance at City Central Hospital. Every word she wrote was a compromise. Every sentence was a small betrayal of the truth. She was building the wall brick by brick around Daniel Wright. But she didn't know about the video. She didn't know that a digital ghost was already floating through the city's servers and that it was about to smash through their wall of silence like a wrecking ball. For 2 days, the blue wall held. The official report, sanitized by Sergeant Rizzo and reluctantly signed by Lisa Carter, depicted a minor incident, a misunderstanding born from stress. The hospital administration, guided by their legal team, was moving cautiously. They had the video, and they had lodged a formal complaint with the police department's Internal Affairs Division, but they were trying to contain the situation, fearing a public relations nightmare. Daniel Wright was placed on administrative desk duty pending the outcome of the IA investigation, a standard, often temporary slap on the wrist. To the outside world, nothing had happened. Daniel felt he had weathered the storm. He was wrong. The storm hadn't even started. No one knows for sure who leaked it. Maybe it was a hospital employee who felt the official channels were moving too slowly. Maybe it was someone in the DA's office who believed the public had a right to know. But on a Wednesday afternoon, 48 hours after the incident, the 47-second video from Dr. Harris's phone appeared on a local activist's social media page. At first, it was a ripple, a few dozen shares, then a few hundred. By evening, it was a tidal wave. The video, raw and shaky, was undeniably powerful. It needed no commentary. The image of a white police officer, his face twisted in rage, holding a gun while berating a calm, professional black nurse, was a potent symbol of everything that was being debated and protested on a national level. The video went viral. It was picked up by local news, then national news outlets. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They all played the clip, followed by heated panel discussions. The hashtag #Justice for Nurse Angela trended worldwide. Angela Brown, who had tried to quietly process her trauma and continue her work, was thrust into the center of a raging national firestorm. Her face was everywhere. She was hailed as a hero, a symbol of quiet dignity in the face of racist aggression. Daniel Wright's face was everywhere too, but as a villain, the personification of a corrupt system. His name, his precinct, his years of service, all became public knowledge. The 17th precinct was besieged by protesters, their chants for justice echoing off the brick walls. The impact on the community was immediate and profound. For many black residents of the city, the video was not a shock, but a painful confirmation of their lived experiences. It was proof of what they had been saying for years, that there were two systems of justice, and that a uniform could be used as a weapon of intimidation, not a symbol of protection. Candlelight vigils were held for Angela outside the hospital. Community leaders demanded action, not just from the police department, but from the mayor's office. The conversation was no longer just about one officer's loss of temper. It was about systemic racism, abuse of power, and the culture of silence that enabled men like Daniel Wright to operate with impunity for years. The police department and the city government were in full-blown crisis mode. Their carefully constructed narrative of a minor misunderstanding had been blown to pieces. The official report signed by Lisa Carter was now seen for what it was, a cover-up. The pressure was immense. The Internal Affairs investigation was swiftly taken out of the department's hands and given to a special prosecutor. The police union released a statement urging the public not to rush to judgment, claiming the video didn't show the full context, a defense that was met with public ridicule. What context could possibly justify that behavior? The spark had been lit. The digital ghost captured by Dr. Harris was no longer just evidence. It was a cultural phenomenon. It had transformed a personal trauma into a public reckoning, and it was about to force the hand of a prosecutor who would have to decide whether to indict one of her own city's police officers for a felony. The stakes had been raised from an internal affair to a national referendum on justice itself. In a corner office overlooking the city, prosecutor Emily Stone watched the video for the 10th time. At 45, Stone had built a reputation as a tough, pragmatic, and fiercely intelligent lawyer. She had spent 15 years climbing the ranks of the district attorney's office, and she understood the delicate political dance that came with the job. She knew that her office's relationship with the police department was symbiotic. They needed the police to bring them solid cases, to testify in court, to gather evidence. An open war with the police union was a war you could not easily win. It meant leaks to the press, uncooperative witnesses in other cases, and a political headache that could end a career. The head of the police union, a formidable and politically connected man named Bob O'Connell, had already been in her office. He hadn't yelled or threatened. He was too smart for that. He spoke of Daniel Wright's decorated service, the stress of the job, and the danger of trial by media. He talked about officer morale. He reminded Stone of the upcoming election and how the union's endorsement was crucial. "This is a good cop who had a bad moment, Emily," he had said, his tone reasonable. "Let internal affairs handle it. Maybe he loses his job. But a felony charge? That's a bridge too far. It will destroy the man, and it will send a chilling message to every cop on the street." It was a powerful argument, and a decade ago it might have worked. But Emily Stone had seen too much. She had seen too many cases fall apart because of questionable police work. She had seen too many complaints against officers get buried in bureaucracy. And now, she had this video. The video changed everything. It wasn't a he said, she said situation. It was cold, hard, visual proof. She saw the gun. She heard the racist sneer in Daniel's voice. Most importantly, she saw Angela Brown's face. She saw a woman doing her job, serving her community, being threatened and demeaned in the most terrifying way. To Emily Stone, that wasn't a bad moment. It was a crime. Her team was divided. The older, more traditional prosecutors urged caution. They spoke of the difficulty of getting a jury to convict a police officer. They worried about the political fallout. The younger prosecutors, however, were adamant. They saw the case as a moral imperative, a chance to prove that no one was above the law. "If we don't charge this," one young ADA argued passionately, "we are basically saying that a cop can pull a gun on an unarmed black woman without consequence, as long as he's having a bad day. What message does that send?" The decision was hers alone. She muted the video and looked out at the city. She saw the hospital in the distance. She thought about Angela Brown going to work every day in that building, walking through the same doors where she had been terrorized. She thought about the protesters camped outside the 17th precinct, their faith in the justice system hanging by a thread. She thought about the oath she took when she became a prosecutor. To seek justice, to represent the people, all of the people. The people included nurses as well as cops. She picked up her phone and called her chief of staff. "Arrange a press conference for 3 o'clock, she said, her voice firm, resolute. "We're announcing the grand jury has returned an indictment. Officer Daniel Wright is being charged with 2 felonies, aggravated menacing with a hate crime enhancement and official misconduct. And issue a warrant for his arrest, immediately." She hung up the phone. The war with the police union had just begun, but Emily Stone had drawn her line in the sand. For Angela Brown and for the entire city, she was going to fight. While her name was being chanted by protesters and debated by pundits on television, Angela Brown was trying to find a semblance of normalcy that no longer existed. The hospital had placed her on paid administrative leave for her own safety, a decision she understood but resented. Work was her sanctuary, the one place where her competence was her identity. Now she was confined to her small, quiet apartment, which had suddenly become a prison. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, producers, and well-meaning but overwhelming supporters. Her social media was a deluge of messages, ranging from heartfelt praise to vile, racist threats. Daniel Wright's supporters, fueled by pro-police blogs and right-wing media, had begun a vicious smear campaign. They dug up her personal information and posted it online. They called her a crisis actor, an anti-police agitator, a liar looking for a payday. They circulated a photo of her from a college protest 10 years earlier as proof of her radical agenda. A car with no license plate sat parked across the street from her building for 2 days straight. She started sleeping with a chair wedged under her doorknob. The trauma of the incident wasn't just the memory of the gun. It was this relentless, terrifying aftermath. The man who had threatened her for 47 seconds had managed to upend her entire life. She felt isolated, adrift in a sea of public opinion. But then, something remarkable happened. The community began to rally around her in tangible ways. Her nursing colleagues organized a rotating schedule to bring her groceries so she wouldn't have to go out. They set up a GoFundMe, not for her, but for the hospital's patient assistance fund in her name, raising over $50,000 in a week. The local chapter of the Black Nurses Association reached out, offering not just emotional support, but also connecting her with a therapist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Michael Harris called her every other day just to check in. "You're not alone in this, Angela," he told her, his voice a steady presence. "What you did, just by standing there and doing your job, was brave. Now let us be brave for you." One evening, there was a soft knock on her door. It was her downstairs neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, holding a warm casserole dish. "I know it's not much," she said, her eyes kind. "But my kids saw what happened on the news. They were so angry for you. We just wanted you to know that we're on your side. You belong here." Angela was so moved she could barely speak. This was the side of the story the news didn't show. The quiet acts of solidarity, the community weaving a net of support around her. This support gave her strength. When Prosecutor Emily Stone's office reached out, asking her to come in and give a formal statement, she didn't hesitate. She walked into the DA's office, head held high, and recounted the events of that day with the same precision and clarity she used when documenting a patient's chart. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't embellish. She just told the truth. Emily Stone listened, deeply impressed by Angela's composure and resolve. "You know they're going to attack you on the stand, don't you?" Stone said gently. "They'll try to twist your words, paint you as aggressive, question your motives." Angela looked the prosecutor directly in the eye. "I'm a trauma nurse," she said, a quiet fire in her voice. "I've had scalpels thrown at me and been spit on by people high on PCP. I have been called every name you can imagine. I'm still standing. Let them try." In that moment, Emily Stone knew she had more than just a victim. She had a star witness. The storm was still raging outside, but inside Angela Brown, a core of unshakable resolve had been forged. In a sleek, wood-paneled law office funded by the police union, Daniel Wright and his attorney, a notoriously aggressive defense lawyer named Mitchell Thorne, were planning their war. Thorne was a master of what he called narrative redirection. His strategy was never to deny the facts outright, especially when there was video, but to flood the courtroom with so much doubt, so much context, and so much character assassination that the jury would lose sight of the central crime. Their defense would rest on a three-pronged attack. First, they would portray Daniel not as an aggressor, but as a victim of circumstance. Thorne planned to call a string of character witnesses, fellow officers who would testify to Daniel's bravery, his dedication, the dozens of times he'd run toward danger. They would paint a picture of a man under immense, unimaginable stress. "We put the jury in his shoes," Thorne explained, pacing his office. "Your brother is bleeding, maybe dying. You're in a chaotic ER, and a rigid, unfeeling hospital employee is quoting policy at you. What would you do? You'd be emotional, you'd be loud, you'd be desperate." The gun, he argued, was a product of that desperation. A momentary lapse in judgment by a man whose training had taught him to always be ready for a threat. They would argue he never pointed it at her, that his finger was off the trigger, that it was a subconscious reaction, not a conscious threat. The second prong of their attack was to dismantle Angela Brown. Thorne had hired a private investigator to dig into every corner of her life. They found the college protest photo, which Thorne planned to blow up and present to the jury as evidence of her anti-authority bias. They would subpoena her employment records, looking for any minor write-up, any complaint from a patient, no matter how frivolous. "We need to show she has a history of being difficult, of escalating situations," Thorne instructed his team. "We're not just putting Officer Wright on trial, we're putting Nurse Brown on trial. We need to make the jury wonder if she provoked him, if her attitude contributed to his reaction." It was a classic, ugly strategy. Blame the victim. Make her seem so unlikable that the jury would feel she deserved what she got. The third and most cynical prong was to attack the system itself. They would argue that this was a political prosecution, a witch hunt fueled by social media mobs, and a prosecutor looking to score political points. They would claim that Daniel Wright was a scapegoat, being sacrificed to appease the anti-police sentiment sweeping the country. "We'll make this about more than just a 47-second video," Thorne declared. "We'll make this about the war on cops, about the dangers of cancel culture. We'll make Daniel Wright a symbol of every officer who feels like they're being persecuted for just doing their job." Daniel, who had been suspended without pay and was now facing financial ruin and a long prison sentence, latched onto this narrative completely. In his mind, he was no longer the man who had lost control. He was a martyr. He convinced himself that he was the real victim. The threats against Angela? He dismissed them as the actions of a few overzealous supporters. The video? "It's being taken out of context," he repeated like a mantra. He and Thorne were crafting a compelling work of fiction, a story of a hero brought low by a biased system and a provocative woman. It was a defense built on a foundation of lies, but they knew that in a courtroom, the most compelling story often wins, regardless of the truth. They were preparing to go to trial, confident they could create enough reasonable doubt to set him free. The first day of the trial of the people versus Daniel Wright felt like the epicenter of a national earthquake. The courthouse was surrounded by a sea of media vans, protesters, and police barricades. Inside, the courtroom was packed, a tense, silent theater where every seat was filled. Angela Brown sat in the front row with prosecutor Emily Stone, her face a mask of calm composure. Across the aisle sat Daniel Wright, looking smaller and less imposing in a suit than he had in the ER. He tried to project an air of confidence, but the nervous twitch in his leg betrayed his fear. Emily Stone's opening statement was a masterclass in controlled, factual storytelling. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use inflammatory language. She simply walked the jury through the events of that day. "This case is not about the pressures of policing," she said, her voice resonating through the silent room. "It is not about a misunderstanding. It is about an abuse of power. It is about a man who took an oath to serve and protect all citizens and who used his gun and his authority to threaten and intimidate one of those citizens, a nurse named Angela Brown, for doing her job." Then she turned to the large screen set up for the jury. "You will see the evidence for yourselves," she said, "and the evidence is undeniable." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. For the next 47 seconds, the only sound was the audio from Dr. Harris's video. Daniel's enraged voice filled the room, clearer and more menacing than it had seemed on the news. "You people are all the same. A little bit of power and you think you can disrespect a police officer." The jury saw his face, contorted with rage, and then they saw it, the glint of the Glock as he unholstered it. Several jurors flinched. One woman put her hand to her mouth. The video ended and the screen went black, but the images hung in the air, a poisonous residue. When it was Mitchell Thorne's turn, he was all bluster and righteous indignation. He strode before the jury, a charismatic performer. "What the prosecution just showed you was a snapshot," he boomed. "A moment in time stripped of all human context. They didn't show you the fear in a man's heart as he watched his brother bleed. They didn't tell you about the 14 years this man has spent putting his life on the line for this city." He painted Daniel as the hero of a different story. He described Angela not as a nurse, but as a cold, rigid bureaucrat who met a desperate man's plea for help with a lecture on policy. He was already planting the seeds of his narrative, that this wasn't a crime, but a human reaction. A cry for help that had been tragically misinterpreted. The first few witnesses for the prosecution were the people from the waiting room. One by one, they took the stand and described the fear they felt. "I thought he was going to shoot her," one woman testified, her voice trembling. "I grabbed my son and tried to hide behind a chair." Dr. Michael Harris was next. He calmly authenticated the video and described why he felt compelled to record it. "I saw a situation escalating to a dangerous level," he said, "and I saw a clear aggressor. It was Officer Wright." Thorne's cross-examination was brutal. He accused the waiting room witnesses of being influenced by the media. He tried to paint Dr. Harris as an anti-police activist with an agenda. But the witnesses held firm. They had seen what they had seen, and the jury had seen it too. The video was the silent, unshakable witness at the center of the trial, and its testimony was going to be very, very hard to refute. The battle had been joined, and the fate of Daniel Wright now rested in the hands of 12 ordinary citizens. The day Angela Brown took the stand, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the soft whir of the ventilation system. Dressed in a simple, conservative navy blue dress, she walked to the witness box with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. Her hands were steady as she was sworn in. This was the moment the defense had been waiting for, their chance to break her, to twist her into the villain of their story. They had underestimated her. Emily Stone began with simple, direct questions, allowing Angela to tell her story in her own words. Angela recounted the events of that afternoon with the dispassionate, factual clarity of a medical professional. She described the triage process, Daniel's escalating anger, and the words he used. When Stone asked her how she felt when he drew his gun, Angela's voice remained steady. "I was terrified," she said simply. "My job is to de-escalate, to heal. I have never had someone who is supposed to represent safety become the source of the danger. In that moment, I was afraid for my life, for my patient's life, and for the lives of everyone in that waiting room." Her testimony was powerful because of its simplicity. There was no hysteria, no embellishment. It was the plain, unvarnished truth. Then came the cross-examination. Mitchell Thorne approached the witness stand like a predator circling its prey. He started by trying to portray her as incompetent. "Nurse Brown, isn't it true that City Central Hospital has a below-average wait time in its ER? That you're understaffed?" "We do our best with the resources we have, sir," Angela replied calmly. He then moved to her character. "And isn't it true that you have a history of being difficult?" He produced a patient complaint from 3 years prior. "This patient said you were rude and had a bad attitude." Angela looked at the document and nodded. "I remember that patient, sir. He was verbally abusive to a junior nurse, and I asked him to stop. He filed a complaint. My supervisor cleared me of any wrongdoing." Thorne's attempt to paint her as unprofessional had backfired, making her look protective and competent instead. Frustrated, Thorne shifted to his main line of attack: provocation. He brought up the giant, blown-up photo of her at a Black Lives Matter protest in college. "Is this you, Ms. Brown, holding a sign that is critical of the police?" "Yes, it is," Angela said without hesitation. "And do you harbor anti-police sentiments, Ms. Brown?" Thorne asked, his voice dripping with insinuation. Angela paused, looking not at Thorne, but directly at the jury. "No, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I harbor anti-brutality sentiments. I believe in accountability. I have worked alongside dozens of good, honorable police officers in my ER. Officer Wright was not one of them on that day. My personal beliefs about social justice have nothing to do with the fact that one of your client's colleagues threatened me with a gun while I was trying to do my job." She had refused to take his bait. She had answered every question with an unshakable, honest dignity. Thorne threw everything he had at her. He insinuated she was after money, that she was enjoying the fame, that she had exaggerated her fear. But nothing stuck. Her composure was her armor. Her truth was her sword. By the time Thorne finished, visibly deflated, he had not landed a single significant blow. He had succeeded only in making himself look like a bully and making Angela look even more credible and sympathetic. As she stepped down from the witness stand and walked back to her seat, Angela Brown had done more than just testify. She had taken back her own narrative. She had faced the man who terrorized her and, without raising her voice, she had exposed his lies and cemented his fate. She had won. The prosecution had presented a powerful case, anchored by the video and Angela's compelling testimony. Now, the defense began its campaign to save Daniel Wright. They called a parade of officers to the stand. all of whom painted a picture of Daniel as a hero cop, brave, decisive, and fiercely loyal. They spoke of the immense stress of the job, the split-second decisions, and the constant threat of danger. It was a carefully constructed performance designed to make the jury see Daniel not as a criminal, but as a flawed warrior. But Emily Stone dismantled their testimony on cross-examination with surgical precision. To one officer who called Daniel a protector, she asked, "Was he protecting Angela Brown when he drew his gun on her?" To another who spoke of Daniel's bravery, she asked, "Does it take bravery to intimidate an unarmed nurse?" The defense's case was faltering. Mitchell Thorne knew he needed something to shift the momentum. He had one last card to play, Officer Lisa Carter. He called her to the stand believing she would stick to the sanitized, misunderstanding narrative from her initial report. He believed the blue wall of silence would hold. He was about to be proven disastrously wrong. Since signing that report, Lisa Carter had been living in her own personal hell. Her conscience was eating her alive. She saw Angela Brown's face in her nightmares. She heard the sneering racism in Daniel's voice. The video going public had been both a curse and a blessing. It meant her lie was now part of a national scandal, but it also confirmed that her gut feeling had been right. She was a cop. She had sworn an oath, and she was participating in a cover-up. A week before the trial, she had walked into Emily Stone's office unannounced and said 2 words, "I'll testify." When Lisa took the stand for the defense, Thorne started by getting her to confirm the details of her report. Yes, she had de-escalated the situation. Yes, Daniel had expressed concern for his brother. But when he tried to get her to agree that it was just a heated argument, Lisa paused. She took a deep breath and looked at the jury. "That's what I wrote in my report, sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But it wasn't the truth." A stunned murmur went through the courtroom. Thorne was blindsided. "What do you mean it wasn't the truth, officer?" "I mean I was encouraged by my sergeant to downplay the incident to protect Officer Wright," Lisa said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "It's a culture. It's an unwritten rule. You protect your own. But what I saw when I arrived at that hospital was not a misunderstanding. I saw terror. And later, after I saw the video, I knew that what I had done, what I wrote in that report, was a lie." It was a bombshell. A serving police officer was admitting under oath to a cover-up and describing the infamous blue wall of silence to a jury. Thorne's face went white with fury. He tried to object, to discredit her, but the damage was done. When it was Emily Stone's turn to cross-examine, she was gentle. "Officer Carter, why are you coming forward with this now?" Lisa looked toward Daniel Wright, who was staring at her with pure, undiluted hatred. "Because the badge is supposed to mean something," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It's supposed to stand for integrity. We cannot say that we are here to enforce the law if we are not willing to be held accountable by it ourselves. What he did was wrong, and what I did by covering for him was wrong too." She had detonated a bomb in the middle of her own career. She would be labeled a traitor, an outcast in the department she had dreamed of joining since she was a little girl. But in that moment, she had chosen her oath over her tribe. She had chosen the truth. And with her testimony, she had hammered the final nail into Daniel Wright's coffin. With Lisa Carter's testimony, the trial reached its dramatic conclusion. The defense had no more witnesses. Their entire strategy lay in ruins. Mitchell Thorne's closing argument was a desperate, rambling tirade. He attacked Lisa Carter as a disgruntled rookie. He attacked Emily Stone for waging a political crusade. He attacked the media for creating a lynch mob mentality. He barely mentioned the facts of the case because the facts were no longer on his side. He was throwing Hail Mary passes, hoping something, anything, would create a shred of doubt in the jury's mind. He ended by pleading for mercy for a good man who made a terrible mistake. Emily Stone's closing argument was the polar opposite. She was calm, logical, and devastating. She walked the jury back through the evidence, piece by damning piece. She played the 47-second video one last time without sound. "Look at his face. she said as the silent video played. "Look at her face. Forget everything the lawyers have said. Forget the politics. Just look. This is not a mistake. This is a choice. He chose to threaten. He chose to intimidate. He chose to use his power not to protect, but to terrorize." Angela Brown also made a choice. She chose to stand her ground. She chose to do her job. And she chose to come into this courtroom and tell you the truth. "Your verdict will send a message," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "Not just to Daniel Wright, but to the entire community. It will say whether a badge is a shield to hide behind or a standard to be held to. It will say whether we are a city of laws for some or for all. Find him guilty, not for politics, not for revenge, but for the facts, for the law, and for justice." Then it was over. The judge gave his final instructions, and the 12 jurors filed out of the courtroom to begin their deliberations. The silence they left behind was deafening. Daniel Wright sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. Angela Brown sat with her hands clasped, her expression unreadable. For the next 3 days, the city and much of the nation held its breath. News channels provided round-the-clock coverage from the courthouse steps. Pundits debated every possible outcome. The jury sent out 2 questions during their deliberations, one asking to re-watch the video, the other asking for a clarification on the legal definition of menacing. Each note sent a fresh wave of anxiety through both the prosecution and defense teams. The length of the deliberation was agonizing. A quick verdict often favors the prosecution. A long one can signal a hung jury or deep disagreement. Was there a juror holding out? Had Thorne's strategy managed to sway someone? The atmosphere in the courthouse was thick with tension. Angela spent the time with her family, trying not to watch the news, trying to find a moment of peace. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the clerk announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom reassembled. The air was electric. Angela returned, her heart pounding. Daniel was brought in, his face ashen. The jury filed back into the box, their faces grim, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the defendant. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman, handed a slip of paper to the clerk. The entire case, the video, the testimony, the protests, the lies, had all come down to this single, quiet moment. The weight of a nation was waiting for one word: guilty or not guilty. The clerk's voice was steady, cutting through the thick silence of the courtroom. "On the charge of aggravated menacing with a hate crime enhancement, we, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Wright." She paused for a beat that felt like a lifetime. "Guilty." A collective exhale swept through the gallery. Angela Brown closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of joy, but of release. The clerk continued, "On the charge of official misconduct, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." It was over. Daniel Wright slumped forward as if struck by a physical blow, his face crumbling into a mask of disbelief. Mitchell Thorne put a hand on his shoulder, but there was nothing left to say. The blue wall had not held. The truth had won. The sentencing hearing was held a month later. The judge, an experienced jurist known for his stern demeanor, listened as Emily Stone argued for a significant prison sentence, calling Wright's actions an unforgivable betrayal of the public trust. Thorne pleaded for probation, citing Daniel's years of service and the loss of his career and reputation as punishment enough. Then the judge spoke, his words directed squarely at Daniel Wright. "You were given a profound responsibility," the judge said, his voice cold. "You were given a badge and a gun, and were trusted to use them to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you became the aggressor. You used your authority to terrorize a public servant in a place of healing. You have not only harmed Ms. Brown, you have harmed the integrity of every good police officer who does their job with honor. This court cannot overlook that." He sentenced Daniel Wright to 15 years in state prison. The sentence was a shockwave, a clear and unambiguous statement that abuse of power would have the severest of consequences. As a bailiff led a stunned Daniel Wright away in handcuffs, Angela Brown walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. She was met by a crowd of supporters who erupted in cheers, but she didn't smile. She felt no sense of triumph, no thrill of victory. She just felt tired. This had never been about revenge, it had been about accountability. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. She had faced down a predator and won, but the fight had taken a piece of her that she would never get back. She was no longer just Angela Brown, trauma nurse. She was now a symbol, a public figure, her trauma forever entwined with a national conversation. The end of the trial was not an ending for her, but the beginning of a long, quiet journey of healing. As the courthouse doors closed behind her, a profound quiet settled over Angela's world for the first time in months. The verdict was in, the sentence handed down, but the echoes of those 47 seconds remained. In the quiet moments that followed, one can't help but dissect the anatomy of that disaster. What turned Officer Daniel Wright, a decorated public servant, into a criminal in less than a minute? It wasn't a single thing, but a toxic cocktail brewed over years. It was a temper that was never checked, dismissed by colleagues as just Danny being Danny. It was the stress of a dangerous job, simmering without a healthy outlet, which he allowed to curdle into a sense of grievance and entitlement. It was the fear for his brother, a genuine human emotion that hijacked his reason. But most profoundly, it was the insidious belief, nurtured by a culture of impunity, that his badge made him different, that the rules that governed others did not apply to him. His rage was not just a reaction to the situation. It was a reaction to his perceived authority being challenged by a black woman he did not see as his equal. Could this have been different? If just one of Daniel's partners years ago had filed a formal complaint about his temper instead of covering for him, perhaps he would have been forced to get help. If the department had a stronger, more proactive system for identifying and counseling officers with anger issues, perhaps this crisis could have been averted. For Angela, the what-ifs were more immediate. What if Dr. Harris hadn't been there, hadn't been brave enough to press record? The entire case would have been her word against two police officers, a battle she almost certainly would have lost. The video was not just evidence, it was her salvation, a stark reminder of the power of documentation in an age of disbelief. It proves that sometimes the only effective shield a citizen has is a simple recording device. Her story underscores a vital truth. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything you can, safely. Your phone can be your most powerful advocate. Angela Brown's journey forced an entire city to confront an ugly truth. It led to the reform of the police department's use of force policies and a new independent body to review civilian complaints. Her name became synonymous with courage, but the title she still prefers is nurse. She returned to the ER, to the controlled chaos she called home, her scars invisible but present. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she didn't shy away from it either, using her platform to advocate for healthcare worker safety and police accountability. Her story is not a victory lap, but a solemn lesson etched into the city's memory, that true justice is not about winning or losing, but about the relentless, painful, and necessary pursuit of truth. It's about ensuring that no one, no matter the color of their skin or the uniform they wear, is above the law. What part of Angela's story resonated with you the most? Do you believe the 15-year sentence was just, too harsh, or not harsh enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please consider sharing it.